All right. Well, hopefully people are able to come in now.
No?
Well, maybe, let's see. Anybody emailing me? Oh yeah, there are 4. There we go. Hello. I'm finally seeing how to operate this part that shows us people are entering the room. So hello, everybody. My name's Tom Roach, and I'm the Director of Interpretation at Gore Place. And you have joined Rebecca Gore's Garden. We will be starting as soon as we get everyone into the room. We have a nice crowd planned for this evening. Looks like we have 50 participants, so just relax. If you want to test out the Q&A, there might be an opportunity. I think you can chat with us as well, but give it a try. You can use the chat function. It's down at the bottom of your screen, or the Q&A function to ask a question at some time during the procedure. If you have a question, I will keep track of the Q&A and ask Diann your question for you. And one attendee has a hand raised. Let's see, how does that work? Yes. Okay, it doesn't show me which attendee has their hand raised. So I'm allowed to talk. Let's see. Hello, is that Susan?
I see her with her hand up.
Is it Susan with her hand up?
I don't see her face, but it says Susan Robertson with hand up, yes.
Oh, okay. So
I see her square.
Q&A, okay, a question in the chat is disabled. Okay, thank you, Susan. So the chat is disabled. I think that's just part of the webinar function. I don't think I can enable it. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. Q&A obviously is working. Very good, thank you, Susan. Let's see. All right. Still just 4 people in, so I'm hoping everyone's link worked. Let's see. I'm going to check my email and make sure that people are not emailing me in a panic. No, no one has emailed. There we go. Got Diann back. Well, we have a lot of people signed up and we only have 4 people attending so far. So I'm going to wait a little while, folks. I ask you to be patient while we see if we can get some more people into the room. Well, there's 5. So people are coming in now. I'll give it just a few more minutes and then we'll start. All right, well, it's after 7 o'clock, it's 7:06. Diane, why don't we get started? So again, hello, everybody. My name is Tom Roach. I'm the Director of Interpretation at Gore Place. I see that we have a couple of questions. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Susan, for yes, you could see the chat question but could not answer it. So the webinar format is not allowing the chat, but we can use the Q&A. So if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A section. Tonight's presentation, Rebecca Gore's Garden, is funded in part by the Waltham Cultural Council. And the Waltham Cultural Council receives support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which is a state agency. So we thank both the Waltham Cultural Council and the Massachusetts Cultural Council for the support. This is one in a series of webinars that we have done with Diann Strausberg, our historian, who is our presenter tonight. We have had other presentations on Robert Roberts, which Diann also hosted. We have done presentations on Jacob Farwell's journal and other things doing with Gore Place, the farm, sheep. And so we will be doing more of these presentations. So if you want to learn more about which presentations are available and when they are, you can go to goreplace.org and you will find a full list of all of our programs. One of the big events that's coming up, if you don't already know about it, Sheep Shearing Festival is a week from Saturday. And so if you'd like to come out and see the Sheep Shearing Festival, it's a fantastic event. 36 years we've been doing the Sheep Shearing Festival. You may already know about it, but you can learn more about it at goreplace.org and you can buy a ticket in advance there too. And if you become a member, you don't have to pay at all. It's free to members. I see we have a few more people have entered the room. That's great. So Diann, I will give a little background for the folks who are not familiar with Gore Place. It's the home of Christopher and Rebecca Gore. Christopher Gore was the governor of Massachusetts, a US senator, a lawyer by trade, an investor, a diplomat, and Rebecca Amory Payne Gore, who's the subject of our talk tonight, his wife, was a very accomplished woman in her own right, designed the beautiful 1806 mansion that is really the main tourist attraction at Gore Place, I would say. People come to see the mansion and the 50 acres of grounds. Christopher and Rebecca Gore were married in 1785, and about that time they bought 50 acres in Waltham and Watertown, Massachusetts, to establish a country seat. And a country seat would be a place where they would come from around this time of year until the fall. They would have maintained a home in Boston for most of the time, except for a 6-year period where they lived here year round. But what they wanted to establish was not just an estate with a home, but a farm, pleasure grounds, something along the English idea of a country estate here in Waltham and Watertown. And so Diann is going to tell you one aspect of that, which is Rebecca Gore's Gardens. So Diann, why don't you go ahead and take over.
Great, thank you, Tom. At Christopher Gore's death in 1827, by his will, Rebecca inherited all of what Tom has just described, the 300 or 400 acre Waltham country seat with its gardens, mansion, and working farm. This recent aerial photo of the existing 40 acres today can help us imagine what it was that Rebecca had inherited. We see the house at the center of what's called the house lot, about 33 acres surrounding the house. And outside of the house lot are surrounding fields, now mostly residential places, that were part of the working farm. Here's how one observer in Gore's time described the place. The seat of Mr. Gore is one of the most elegant in this part of the country. The house is a spacious and noble building of brick, after the plan of some of the best houses in Europe. The house is situated in the center of pleasant grounds, tastefully laid out, surrounded by a walk, a mile in circuit, intersected by several other walks, on all of which are growing trees and shrubbery of various kinds. Our observer continued describing the practical working farm surrounding the house lot, devoted, he said, to raising every variety of agriculture. Gore's contemporaries called the estate splendid, elegant, aristocratic, and noble, and sometimes, acknowledging its beautiful, productive, and extensive landscape, referred to it simply as Gore's garden. In important ways that we will focus on tonight, it was not only Christopher's garden, but also Rebecca's. She participated in designing and running the estate and in making use of its products and its pleasures, and continued her involvement after Christopher's death. In 1830, the newly founded Massachusetts Horticultural Society acknowledged her role in horticulture when they elected Rebecca an honorary member. The Gores were early leaders in agricultural and horticultural improvements in America. By the late 1820s, interest in those pursuits was fast growing. So in February 1829, on a bitterly cold day, as it had been described, when streets were piled with snow, 16 gentlemen, all with gardening on their minds, met in Boston to found a state horticultural society. And there on the left, you see its emblem, its seal, which is still in use today, with the Latin phrase that means for the common good. And that's certainly the way they saw the support of horticulture, as something for the common good. Its purpose was to encourage and improve the science and practice of horticulture, meaning improving gardens, finding new species of trees, fruit, vegetables, flowers, and other ornamentals, and improving their cultivation. And on the right, you see the first building that they built of 3, eventually dedicated to the Horticultural Society's offices. But the first one was built in 1845, so that's after the Gore time. Up until 1845, the society met in a number of different public buildings throughout Boston. Well, within 60 months of having, within a month, I should say, of having begun the society, 160 men had joined, and the society put out a call for more. There is yet room, they said. They were attracting scientific citizens, opulent citizens, and many highly respected gardeners. The society saw horticulture as widely appealing across social and economic lines and welcomed, at least to some degree, wide participation. They did fail to mention women. But the following year, society members found themselves debating the proposed election of women as honorary members. Honorary members defined to be eminent persons distinguished for their attainments in the science of horticulture. 3 women were put forth: Madam Dorothy Dix, Mrs. Mary Griffith, and Rebecca Gore, all widows running large estates and known for their zeal in forwarding the objectives of the society. Yet some members resisted because, as one man later explained, perhaps only partly in jest, a woman in the garden made great trouble as long ago as the days of Adam. But a very prominent citizen, H.A.S. Dearborn, also the new president of the society, is said to have silenced any complaints, and the women were admitted, joining an elite group of honorary members that included men like the botanist David Hosack, Presidents George Washington and John Adams, and the Revolutionary War hero General Lafayette. Now, the 2 women, Dix and Griffiths, have very interesting lives. We only have time to cover a few points of their lives, but I'd like to share some of their story with you. Madam Dorothy Dix died at the age of 91 in 1837, outliving by 28 years her husband Elijah, a doctor and real estate speculator who had founded Dixmont, Maine. At his death, Madam Dix inherited their large estate in Boston, and her garden there produced this pear, named the Dix pear. It was a new native pear, and in 1831, it won the Horticultural Society Prize for the best native pear. Now, her obituary, which was rather long for the time, covered only her strong religious faith, intriguingly mentioning a life with much adversity, although leaving out any details. Perhaps this was a reference to her son, who had left Harvard Divinity School when he married Mary Bigelow and broke the rule against married students. His parents disliked her background and that she was 18 years older than her young husband. Things did go wrong in the marriage, and their daughter was taken in at age 12 by her grandmother, Madame Dix, who had challenges dealing with the rebellious young Dorothea, who did go on to be that famous activist and mental health reformer, Dorothea Dix. This is Mary Griffiths, Mrs. Griffiths. She was born Mary Corey. Her father was a French immigrant, a successful New York caterer and hotel manager. She married what appears in some literature to be, is John Griffiths, called sometimes a socialite. He died in 1815. After his death, and only after his death, Mrs. Griffiths, Mary, buys this extensive estate named Charles Hope on the Raritan River near New Brunswick, New Jersey. She did many things in horticulture here. She was considered to be a scientific horticulturist who published studies and observations about that science, and her major contribution was her expertise on bees. She also had a wide range of interests. In 1831, she became the first female author of a utopian novel named 300 Years Hence. And she would go on to publish more fiction and nonfiction. Before turning to Rebecca's garden and her horticultural activity, perhaps I should follow up a bit on women in the Mass Horticultural Society. It's clear that early on, they recognized women's expertise and value in horticulture and gardening. And almost immediately, women, if not members, participated by exhibiting the products of their gardens. It took a while for full membership and office holding to open up to women. By the 50th anniversary in 1879, the Society can claim many women elected as members, honorary and full. And their report on that anniversary goes on to say, to some length, to talk about how their presence is a great benefit to the Society. Now, before that happened in 1879, there was one interesting obstacle for women. For the anniversary of the Society in 1842, as usual, a great celebration dinner was planned, but one writer from the Society lets us know that there had been some controversy leading up to the celebration. As the Society described it, quote, "The question of admitting ladies to the tables for dinner had been discussed, and objections made on the ground that if we had the ladies at dinner, we could not have the wine. But better judgment prevailed, according to this author, the wine being cast out and the women being kept in." Well, let's turn more to Rebecca's garden and her horticultural activities. This is the house that was in the center of the estate. And it is where most of Rebecca and Christopher's horticultural activities took place. As is so often the case for women, as we know, the historical record for Rebecca can be sparse. Existing documents, though, do provide these vignettes or brief scenes that give us insight into Rebecca. It is clear, for instance, from some letters that were written, that Rebecca was very involved in the design of the Waltham house and gardens. Now, the original property or house on their property had burned while the Gores were in England for 8 years, beginning in 1796. This long stay occurred because Rebecca was a commissioner sent to England to negotiate with the British on aspects of the Jade Treaty. While in London for such a long time, they did have the opportunity to travel elsewhere around England and to France and other countries. And they made plans to rebuild the Waltham house. A letter from Gore to his friend Rufus Kings gives evidence of Rebecca's participation in the planning. In France, they had met the successful French architect, Jacques Legrand. And here are examples of some of his big projects that he had completed. On the right, the dome over the corn exchange, and on the left, a theater. And he was probably best known for these kinds of public projects. But Gore enlisted his help in their plans for a new house. In a letter to King, Gore mentions that Mrs. Gore, as Mr. Gore is writing, is now with Mr. Legrand in the adjoining parlor building houses. After they returned to London from Paris, Gore sent another letter to King, who was still there, asking him to share the plans that Mrs. Gore has sent of their intended house, to share them with Legrand, and request him to make a complete and perfect plan according to their sketch. We know that aspects of the new French architecture and design was incorporated into the Waltham house. Unfortunately, the plans for that house have not been found. Now, Rebecca's interest in landscape design, some of that knowledge of that comes to us through letters between Rebecca's cousin, Catherine Codman, and Catherine's husband, John. Some of you may have visited the Codman estate out in Lincoln. And that's where the Codmans were living at the same time as the Gores were in London. John was a wealthy merchant who owned several ships and traded with England, and he was there on business at the same time the Gores were. And like Gore, he had a great interest in improving his country estate. From London, he wrote to Catherine, "Mrs. Gore and myself have been planning improvements at Lincoln. She says it is the handsomest place in America and might be made in the English style with ease." As Rebecca would later sit in Paris with Legrand designing that Waltham house, she now sat with John Codman in London planning the Lincoln landscape. What is this new English style that they were referring to? A historian describing what John Codman saw as he traveled through England, viewing its great country estates, helped to explain that for us. Quote, "He was impressed by the fine distant views and the deliberate concealment of roads and structures, kitchen gardens, greenhouses, and farm buildings covered from sight, hidden by trees. And Codman marveled at the clean gravel walks that circumvented the grounds." So John Codman wrote back to his gardener, encouraging him to plant more trees to hide those kinds of utilitarian buildings on his Lincoln estate. According to this historian, John Codman's most cherished scheme, however, he attributed it to Mrs. Christopher Gore, who, in keeping with the new English style, suggested the Lincoln foreyard, that would be the yard in front of the house, should be thrown down into a lawn that carriages may drive to the front door. This idea John Codman liked a lot. It's not clear that he ever did it. It's not currently the way the landscape is designed there at the Lincoln estate. However, it is similar for suggestion to the way the drive looks at Gore Place today. The Gores also visited the same places and estates and drew on what they were learning for their gardens and their farm. Just a quick look at some of the places they exhibited include this Hatfield House, Lord Salisbury's. You can see a grander scale than the Gores had in mind, but they were taking lessons from visiting places like this. And I believe it is the Hatfield House, for which there's a reference in one of Gore's letters referring to Rebecca going there to botanize. So she was, and it was a big fad at the time. She was interested in botany. Another place they visited, Bakewell's farm. Gore was especially interested in the agricultural and livestock experiments that Bakewell was doing. You see a Leicester Longwool sheep here. This picture actually comes from Gore Place today. We have these sheep. Bakewell had them on his estate, and Gore may have seen them there. So Rebecca's interest and knowledge are apparent in the Codman letters, and she certainly participated in the Waltham landscape and garden designs. In many ways, the Gores designed their Waltham house and landscape in relation to each other. And here we see some of Rebecca's activities. In the Great Hall, for instance, the largest and grandest room at Gore Place, meant for entertaining. You see the wallpaper on the wall here. I don't know if you see anything in that paper. Look closely, and you can see that the columns resemble corn stalks. And they were growing corn on the estate. So for their grand entertaining spaces, they decorate with corn stalks for the columns. And in between the columns, you can see the pattern of grape leaves. Grapes also something the Gores grew on their estate, and happened to be one of the big challenge for horticulturists at the time, the growing of grapes. And Gore was becoming very successful at that. And by the way, we know that Rebecca picked out the wallpaper. She was often, she was sometimes asked by her friends who trusted her very much to pick out and purchase wallpaper for them. One last wallpaper example. This is a recently discovered piece of original wallpaper from a passage on the first floor. It likely reminds you, it does us, of leaves or trees, echoing the many trees on the estate, and they were a key aspect of the estate's design. And finally, her china, purchased in Paris, has this beautiful cornflower design. It was a standard design on this china, but it was expensive china, and we know that Rebecca put a lot of thought and care, including regarding her budget, into what she was to purchase for Waltham, and she chose cornflowers. In rooms like these, and with china like this, the Gores entertained, and they were known for their hospitality. From the gardens came food that enhanced guest experiences by providing rare and beautiful and delicious things, like fruit that was not commonly available, or for most people was out of season. We know from a letter, this one written by the wife of Gore's minister in Waltham. Samuel Ripley was the minister. His wife is a name some of you may have come across, Sarah Alden Bradford Ripley. And Mrs. Ripley told a relative that Mrs. Gore is famous for her fruit parties. And certainly the gardens could provide an unusual array of fruits throughout a long season, perhaps from as early as April through October or November. A letter from Gore to King describes a variety of fruits on the estate: peaches, plums, apples, cherries, grapes, pears, and more, and especially strawberries. Strawberries were a special interest of horticulturists, and we just have one example of many varieties that were out there. Christopher Gore introduced to the Boston area the mulberry strawberry, and it became a very successful strawberry. It was extensively cultivated around Boston, especially for the market. And it was first grown in the area by Christopher, who had received the plant from his friend Rufus King living in New York. Now, New York has a somewhat different climate for strawberries than New England does, so Christopher may have had to do some experimenting with how to properly cultivate the strawberry for the Boston area, and that was something that horticulturalists like Gore would do. I should mention, or I'd like to mention, a particular fruit party, a rather famous fruit party, at least among certain historians, and it's famous strawberry, one strawberry. In the summer of 1817, President James Monroe was making a tour across the country and planned to visit Waltham and the Gores. Rebecca may well have organized one of her fruit parties for the event. Just a few days before the event, Gore had written, "Strawberries are becoming fine and plenty." So we can imagine that they would be planning to serve them to the president. Now, difficult politics underlie this Monroe-Gore meeting. Monroe was a Jeffersonian who had beat Gore's good friend and fellow Federalist Rufus King for the presidency the previous fall. During the War of 1812, a few years before, Federalists and Republicans had been on the brink of civil war, some said. Now Monroe was setting out to mend these bad feelings. In a letter to Jeremiah Mason, a New Hampshire politician, Gore reported on the president's visit. Gore wrote, "The president rushed in, bowed, ate a strawberry, and rushed out again." That was his sum of the visit. It could be that Monroe had overly filled his schedule, which seems to be true, or perhaps this was something of a political snub. before we look at Rebecca's horticultural work while she ran Gore Place, I want to share two final glimpses of Rebecca from the records. Documents in her own words are rare, as are reports by witnesses to her specific actions and behaviors. But two of the rare documents on Rebecca happen to be in her words or describe her actions, and they are talking about Rebecca walking in gardens. Here's Mary Alsop King. We've been mentioning the Kings and Rebecca Payne. They were very dear friends. And one of these letters is Rebecca writing to Mary King in 1803, expressing her great sadness that the Kings have left London to return to America, and the Gores are left alone with few or any friends. And the one sentence from the letter that I want to share with you is this. Rebecca says, "We had, as you may suppose, a tryst dinner, after which we walked around the garden, she and Christopher, where, like every other place, I shall miss your society." In Rebecca's time, gardens like hers were a place to walk for pleasure and an especially intimate place for private conversation, a place to interact with others outside of the normal social constraints. And this was particularly appealing to women. Garden walks with Mary after dinner may have been a common occurrence while they were together. The other report of Rebecca in the garden came back home at Gore Place. And you may recall that we've mentioned paths through the Gore Estate a few times here tonight. This is a watercolor of one of those paths, we're pretty sure. It's entitled The Straight Walk, and it was done by a local artist, Ellen Robbins, and she painted this in 1879. And this is like one of those paths through Gore Place that was surrounded by trees. There were other paths that went through the gardens. Now, during Rebecca's widowhood, the Jackson Lee family, a family related to the Gores, enjoyed summers at their own country houses in Waltham, during which the 5 young Lee brothers visited often their great aunt Gore's place. Later, one brother shared a memory with his own daughter, who then left us this rare image of Rebecca. The daughter wrote, "It was at this place, which had belonged to my father's great uncle, Governor Christopher Gore, that my father and his brothers had played as little boys, and where they remembered seeing their widowed Aunt Gore as a dignified little old lady in a black silk gown, walking in the sunny garden." Rebecca may have found solace as a widow in the gardens that she and Christopher had often found were restorative and refreshing in their well-loved country landscape. As a widow, the gardens she walked were considered the best in landscape design. A Horticultural Society history of landscape tells us that in Gore's time, the estate was, quote, "one of the most beautiful places, its landscape and gardens rated as one of the country's 2 best specimens of the modern style." During her widowhood, Rebecca would continue horticultural advancements at the Gore country seat, especially through the work of her gardener. That man was Roderick, nicknamed Roddy Toohey, born in 1796, Ballinoclough, Ireland. He emigrated to America in 1823 and went to work for Gore. If you can read the writing here, you'll see that Toohey is becoming a naturalized citizen, and with the help of the Payne nephews, William and Edward Payne, who here on this document are, swearing that Toohey has been in America for 3 years and is of good character and so forth. After Christopher's death, Toohey stayed on as Mrs. Gore's gardener. Now, I'm calling him this, but that was actually a title that was used for him in the horticultural press, Mrs. Gore's gardener. The first documented horticultural advancement made by Toohey had to do with a pear tree, and it was while Mr. Gore was still alive. When plum tree? When bugs attacked Christopher Gore's plum trees, Toohey successfully went to work applying his own concoction of, among other things, tobacco juice, various oils, soap, and soot. Later in the New England Farmer, the newspaper published his methods, and his method also appeared the next year in a collection of advice put together called The New American Gardener, so advice for gardeners, and that was published in 1828, very popular, went through at least 3 editions. Next, for Toohey and Gore place came what I think of as the pear campaign. In 1828, a letter from Roderick Toohey appeared in the horticultural press, the New England Farmer, where Toohey introduced a new native fruit, the Heathcote pear, which he said he had named after the good old gardener at Gore, John Heathcote, who had raised the pear tree from seed in Gore's garden. Toohey had been encouraged by local nurserymen, the Winship brothers, to publicize this pear, and he had decided to do that. He called it a fine and handsome fruit. Desirable in many aspects, it was highly flavored, Toohey wrote. The pear can justly claim its place among the first pears in the country. Now, Mrs. Gore joined in the pear campaign and twice delivered to the New England Farmer offices a few of her fine Heathcote pears, it was written, from the original tree in her garden. Horticulturalists did indeed judge the pear superior and worthy of cultivation. In 1830, the Society Committee on Fruits awarded its yearly premium or prize, a prize of $4, for the best native pear, the Heathcote, to Roderick Toohey, gardener to Mrs. Gore. Toohey had also been a founding member of the Horticultural Society the year before. The society believed that horticultural exhibitions were the best way to educate the public on horticulture and motivate gardeners to work on and present their products. The society held them weekly and a major one at its yearly anniversary meetings. So every Sunday during growing season, the society exhibited flowers, fruits, and vegetables submitted by their growers and considered particularly fine, excellent specimens. You brought your best things to exhibit. The Agricultural Society encouraged farmers to send especially fruits in that seemed to be extraordinary in some way. And in case anyone thought that it was not worthwhile really to be kind of displaying your produce, the society explained that these exhibitions are not, quote, idle parades. It may serve to make new and valuable varieties of fruit, which often remain for years entirely unknown to a wider audience. And perhaps they were thinking of things like the Heathcote pear that had been growing at Gore Place, but wasn't really known to the wider world. So it was through exhibitions that these things could happen. Well, Mrs. Gore and Roderick Toohey apparently had many excellent specimens in their gardens because they often exhibited at these weekly exhibits and these annual events. So just as an example of these exhibitions, this is, I think later than, this is 1852, and it's taking place on the Boston Common in the garden. So this is past Gore time, but this is the kind of thing that you would see at these exhibitions with fruit and vegetables and flowers laying out and people coming to look at them and prizes being awarded. So Toohey and Mrs. Gore's participation at the second annual celebration, the dining hall, it was written, was tastefully ornamented the table loaded with numerous baskets of beautiful fruit. And among that fruit, from Mr. Toohey in Waltham, black Hamburg grapes, pears, peaches, and melons. I think I may have mentioned that grapes was one of the big challenges for horticulturalists at this time. They were trying to figure out how to grow grapes in New England. And again, this is a place where the Gore Estate stood out. Also, this grape was exhibited by Toohey at certain times. Flower exhibits also came from the Gore Estate. The same year that the Heathcote pear won the annual prize, Toohey won for the most successful cultivation of the rhododendron maximum. The following July, he exhibited a rare flower called Bignonia grandiflora and several blossoms of the rhododendron again. The Horticultural Society reported that both these flowers were particularly noticed, not only for their intrinsic beauty, but also as fine specimens of horticulture. So again, that seems to indicate that there was something about growing these flowers that presented cultivation challenges, and in this case had been overcome by Mrs. Gore's gardener. Less often appearing at these events were vegetables, especially in the early days of the society and these exhibits. Especially early vegetables were rare. But in a report around that time, the society wrote that while these vegetables were rare as far as exhibits, we find the forcing of vegetables, which was what was required really to get early vegetables, was not wholly unknown. For in May of 1830, forced vegetables were shown by Mrs. Gore's gardener. So in May of 1830, they had specimens they considered good enough to exhibit for potatoes, string beans, cucumbers, and mushrooms, all of fine appearance, the society reported. These forced early vegetables could come about by the use of hotbeds. Christopher Gore was talking in about 1817 that he thought he might have asparagus, was it asparagus, I think, by May, perhaps it was. Well, as you'll see, 10 years later, Roderick Toohey is getting it much sooner than that, and he's using hotbeds, which extend the growing season and encourage products from warmer climates to grow in New England. And this topic of hotbeds was of much interest to the society, and the Gore Estate was able to impress with their forced vegetables, made possible by hotbeds that the Gore farm manager, Jacob Farwell, helped Toohey to build. Most impressive of all, I think, was the Gore Estate early asparagus. On February 24th, 1830, too early in the season for the MHS exhibitions, they hadn't started yet, Toohey left at the New England Farmer's Office bunches of asparagus 6 inches long, which they said we expect is the first cut this season in this vicinity. The following February, he sent several bunches of good size and fine appearance. The paper reported Mr. Toohey has produced the first asparagus that has appeared in Boston for several years past, so the earliest that they had seen. Now that March, Toohey did get a little bit of a surprise in his forced vegetables. The seeds that he had expected to produce a nice white head of early London cauliflower turned out to be purple broccoli. And he registered a bit of a complaint with the company that had sent him the seed, letting them know that he had made a mistake. They had made a mistake. The following year, Toohey exhibited early potatoes in July, and that October, he exhibited fine sweet potatoes. Now, I had read that several times and thought, well, even if they're exceptionally fine, perhaps sweet potatoes are not that uncommon in October. But then as I was reading some of these stories in the New England Farmer, I learned that sweet potatoes was another big challenge that the horticulturalists and farmers were taking on. They are a warm climate vegetable, well known in the Carolinas and Georgia, and it was very different to cultivate them in New England. So if the Toohey was producing fine sweet potatoes at Gore, he was probably overcoming challenges that others had. So with the sweet potatoes, the 1831 season was ending and the winter lull in exhibits was beginning. We might expect to see more from Gore Place and Mrs. Gore's gardener in the next season or on, but there is no record of Toohey exhibiting or other records for him until on December 15th, 1835, Roddy Toohey at age 39 died of epilepsy. He is buried in Waltham. Here's a close-up of a miniature silhouette of Rebecca Gore. This is different from silhouettes that are cut out of paper. This was painted on plaster, I believe it is, and possibly done by the silhouettist at the English court, the court of George III, I guess it was then. And this hangs in Gore Place. I thought we'd wrap up with this final picture of Rebecca. She had died in 1834, about 2 years before Toohey. She bequeathed the Waltham estate to her nephew, William Payne. To leave such a legacy for William was perhaps one of the motivations she had for continuing to operate and advance at the estate. For a few years prior to Toohey's death, when Toohey didn't seem to be active, there was limited notice of some horticulture at the Gore Garden when William Payne exhibited a melon from Waltham. And he was a member at that time of the Massachusetts Horticultural Society and held an office or two. But almost immediately after Rebecca's death in 1834, William began selling off the estate. At the end of the year, he auctioned the house lot, the mansion, and the gardens, then left immediately for the West Indies in hope of improving his lung ailments. He moved later to Paris, where he died in 1838. The auction ad for the farm and house lot, even accounting for advertising hype, show a productive property. The county seat, it said, is in a high state of cultivation with tastefully laid out excellent fruit and garden, large orchard, thriving nursery of apple trees, and a choice collection of pear trees, an excellent vineyard and flowers, including a large collection of roses and geraniums. Among the many abundant farm products up for auction were 600 bushels of potatoes, 40 tons of hay, and 2,000 cabbages. That Rebecca had proved a good steward of the property may be read in this auction ad. And with her gardener, we know, Roderick Toohey, she had continued to advance horticulture at the estate. In fact, the partnership of Rebecca Gore and Roddy Toohey had left a significant mark on the horticultural landscape of Boston. Their passing ended a brief but a brilliant season. So, Tom, I'd be happy to have comments, questions, discussion.
Great. Diann, if you could stop sharing it. Well, you can keep sharing, I guess.
Keep sharing.
That's fine.
And Tom,
sure.
you may have comments to add about, I know you know something about the agriculture.
Oh, well, I was just saying that as far as the agriculture, I think this was about Rebecca Gore's garden, so we didn't get into it much, but there will be another webinar in the fall that deals with Jacob Farwell, his journal, what was happening in agriculture. Donnie Weiss is going to give that. He's our farm educator. He's doing a great job putting together a farm tour. So if you want to learn more about agriculture at Gore Place, the thing to do is go to goreplace.org. You can sign up for one of Donnie's outdoor walks where he talks about the farm and the agriculture, or you can also attend another webinar. If you have, we have some questions. I'm going to act as moderator here. So let me, an anonymous attendee says, didn't the Gores plant thousands of trees, shrubs on their estate? They did. They planted many, many shrubs and trees on the estate. Part of setting up the estate, I think, had to do with the fact that many farms, more typical farms, didn't really plant trees for just the beauty of the trees. They planted trees to produce fruit, or they planted trees to produce nuts. But the Gores were planting trees and importing them from Europe. So they imported what the English call lime trees. I know that Gore also was enclosing his fields in hedgerows, and the hedges that were typical here in New England were not up to his liking. He felt that they just didn't look attractive enough in the fall. So he had whitethorn imported, thousands of whitethorn, probably transplants, brought up from Washington, D.C. And then another person asked, do any of those trees remain? That's a great question. So there are some of the trees that we know remain from Christopher Gore's time and Rebecca Gore's time. In fact, they are trees that they may have planted themselves personally. And one of them in particular, or there are now three, I think, horse chestnut trees on the property that date to the time of the Gores. And then Prentice asked, do you have any comments about the Gores raising Mangelwurzel? Kind of beat. And yes, so Mangelwurzel is mentioned in Jacob Farwell's journals, I believe, and in other places. Mangelwurzel is indeed a kind of a beet. It's a root vegetable that is huge. It's about as big as a football. You can imagine that. And it was fodder for the pigs. And the other thing that's interesting, I didn't know this, but of course, much of the food that the Gores were growing on the farm was to feed the livestock, including the pigs and the cattle and the horses and the sheep that they raised here, including all kinds of grains. But the Mangelwurzel in particular, to feed the pigs, pigs cannot digest potatoes or root vegetables without them being cooked. So there was always a large copper cauldron with a fire outdoors, boiling down things like Mangelwurzel, et cetera, so that it could be fed to the pigs. Potatoes were not particularly, at least by the class of people like the Gores, potatoes were not particularly thought to be people food. They were just food for the animals. So there are things that we today that the Gores might not have eaten. Oats, for example, I like my oatmeal every morning, but oats were reserved for horses in those days. And if there's any other questions, just go to the Q&A and type in your question, and I'll ask it of Diann, or I'll try to answer it myself.
And Tom, I would just highlight about trees, that trees were an essential element of that English garden style that Rebecca was so advocating for. So you had to have trees to hide the things that you didn't want to be able to see, and to also create this. It was a very designed informal look to your landscape, and trees were essential to that.
Yes, that's good. And by the way, I don't know why I didn't think of this right away, but we have Lorna Keith is one of our volunteers who has she's a naturalist and has put together a wonderful tree tour. And if you go to goreplace.org, you can sign up for a tree tour. It's a lovely walk around the property where she highlights the trees that are here today, the trees that would have been here in Gore's time, some of the important specimen trees that relate to the time of the Gores. And there is a plan that is ongoing, and currently we are planting trees right now. There are red maples being planted and sycamore trees. So there is an attempt to put more trees back that the Gores would have enjoyed on the property in the proper locations, the proper species. It's a very interesting project because some of those species have been improved, so they don't quite relate to what the Gores might have known. So it's a very interesting project to try to repopulate the estate with species trees that the Gores would have known. And I think that may be all the questions, Diann. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We appreciate it very much, and I hope that you will let us know if there are other things you would like to learn about Christopher and Rebecca Gore and the Gore Estate, people that worked here with them, Robert Roberts, the Farwell brothers, you name it. If you would like to contact me at events@goreplace.org. And if you can't remember that, just go to goreplace.org and go to the staff listing. And my name is Tom Roach. And you can send me an email and tell me about what you're interested in and see if we can't put together a presentation designed for your interests. And again, there will be more of these webinars. So if you go to goreplace.org, you can see a calendar of all the upcoming events, including the Sheep Shearing Festival and our tours of the grounds and our tree tours and other events. Oh, and since we're talking about gardening, in May, Farmer Scott, our wonderful farmer, is having his plant sale. They are heirloom tomatoes, transplants, and vegetables and herbs. And for the first time in 3 years, it will be a live event. So you can come to the farm. It'll be all outdoors. You can buy your transplants for your garden. You can get your heirloom tomatoes. You can get your peppers. I was helping him transplant some very interesting varieties of peppers. And if you want to get your garden looking like maybe something that Rebecca Gore and Christopher Gore would recognize, come to Farmer Scott's tomato plant sale. And that will be May 12, 13, and 14 from 9 to 3. If you want to see what's up for sale, you can go to our website, goreplace.org. And again, we thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Diann, a wonderful presentation. And if there are no other questions, then I will end the webinar here and say we hope to see you soon at